You're joining me on day 17 of my cycle tour around Spain. We're in Asturias and we're just leaving the spectacular Pola de Somiedo National Park and setting out for Oviedo, 83 kilometres away. Now, I cycled up yesterday to the Pola de Somiedo, so the first 10 kilometres of this cycle today I've cut out. You can look at the end of yesterday's, and you'll see me going up the other direction. I might actually post it separately as well, just because it's quite a spectacular cycle. But just as yesterday I was saying, it's hard to pick a favourite day from the whole tour, but maybe yesterday was it. I reviewed the footage of this morning and I went, oh, actually no, maybe this is my favourite. So I'm climbing up to a pass called the Puerto de San Lorenzo, which is at, I think it's 1,347 metres, so I think that made it the third highest pass of the tour. And I remember as I was cycling this, thinking, this feels like the sort of ascent you might find in a national cycling tour de Spain in this case, of course. And sure enough, on looking it up, it turns out it is used in the Tour de Spain. It's been used a few times, and what felt like very steep sections on this ascent were in fact 15% slopes. So they were very steep indeed. It's certainly something that I think would be very hard to do if you were touring with luggage and everything and you weren't using an e-bike. You could probably do it if you were very fit indeed, but I'm doing a total of 83 kilometers today, and this initial part of it was a real kind of, wasn't a struggle, it was actually really enjoyable. It was extraordinarily beautiful, as you can see from the roadside shots I'm posting here, but it was quite you get a sense of achievement, even on an e-bike, when you battle your way up these sort of slopes. I did end up taking a couple of breaks on the way up, and as I'll explain in a minute, I also used a lot of battery. But I looked at the map, and I was aware that once I was at the top of this climb, it looked to me like a lot of the rest of the day was going to be descending to Oviedo over a long time. Well, I've just climbed to, I think, the third highest pass of the whole trip. I think this is about 1410 meters, but it was unusual because it's very early in the day, and also it's a very quick, well, very slow is more accurate climb. It's something like 800 meters over 6 kilometers, which lots of S-bends, quite tight. I just put the bike into sport mode, which is the second highest, and used about 40% of a battery on it, but absolutely spectacular, as you can see. It's windy up here, very windy, so I'm using the microphone and hoping that comes out a bit better. And if you can hear the ding 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 dings, what that actually is a load of the mountain cows. It's all cows on these high passes. I've seen very few sheep, and they have these bells on it. And the other thing about this part of the trip is these mountains have bears in them. I've seen signs warning people to be careful, but they also have wolves. And I did have a moment of going, should I be Googling what to do if you come across a wolf? Am I meant to shout at it? They like dogs. Are you just meant to pedal as fast as you can to get away? I think they can do 40 kilometers an hour, so a wolf going uphill would not have been good. But I have not yet been eaten by a wolf. There is a possibility this will turn out to be a tragic last message. They'll find my half-eaten body on the way down, and they'll get into my phone, and this will be the final message on it, but let's see, maybe not. Anyway, day 16 or 17, can't quite remember which, been a hell of a trip. Definitely feeling I've bitten off a bit more than I can chew at the moment with these days of climbings. But I do have an option for shortening a couple of the days coming up. So I'll see how I feel at the end of this day, where I'm heading to Oviedo. I think 65 kilometers to go, but it literally looks like it's all downhill. I think it must be following a river or something. So maybe I'll be lucky and I can switch from being worried about the battery running out to instead being worried about the brakes running out. Anyway, good trip, oh my God.
think this pass is where you cross over from the Somiedo National Park to the Las Urbanas La Mesa Park, which is, I think, about 450 square kilometers. It's pretty vast. A lot of this is beech trees. The highest mountains in it, I think, are 2,400 meters, so pretty substantial. And it's famous also for its wild bear population, but also there are golden eagles apparently, and quite a wide range of wildlife, but also paintings in caves from the Bronze Age and the Iron Age. So there's basically a whole load of different things happening here, as well as the more recent human agricultural practices. Unfortunately, this is yet another day where I'm zooming through it. I'm doing 83 kilometers trying to get to Oviedo. I know there's a lot of climbing, so there's an awful lot of stuff that would have been good to stop at and have a look at in more detail. And to be honest, I think I'm definitely going back to this whole region. The couple of days cycling here was fantastic. Now, if you've been following the earlier days, you'll know round about day 14, coming down some very steep cliff roads in Galicia, I began to worry about the state my brakes were in. And today was another day where I was beginning to go, am I in trouble here? So basically one of the issues with e-bikes is because they're heavier, and also because of the motor putting extra force on components, things like chains and the disc brakes tend to wear out faster than they will on other bikes. So my routine practice whenever I do one of these long distance tours is I bring it into my bike shop that I got it from, Green Air, and I ask them to replace anything that's likely to wear out in the next 2,000 kilometers. So the chain and the brakes are things I would normally mention explicitly. And I had done this before I came over. However, I'd also done about 300 kilometers in Connemara, which is also pretty heavy on brakes. And of course, Spain, there's so many descents. I mean, like, there was a lot. This trip had far more climbing and descents than I've done in any other one. So by this stage, the brakes are they're just beginning to feel a little bit not convincing, and I'm a little bit concerned about them and wondering how that's going to turn out. But it's going to be a few days before that gets more serious, and getting back to Bilbao itself would turn out to be, a little stressful in that last final day. So the area we're going through at the moment is also where this long distance common walking route, Common Rio de Mesa, runs. And that's something actually I might well go back to and try and find. They think it's at least 5,000 years old and then was developed by the Romans. So there's Roman roads along part of it. Until quite recently into the modern age, it was still one of the major routes to get from Asturias into Leon. My first coffee break of the day. Snacks cost a couple of euro. Now, as you may well have noticed, traffic has been picking up, and I was wondering, because I'm getting close to Oviedo, which is a big city, whether I was going to be facing heavy traffic perhaps on this road all the way in, which would have been a pain. But then I had a very pleasant surprise, and that comes because I hadn't really planned this route myself. I just stuck it into the Cycle Travel website, and it then planned a route out for me. And what I hadn't realised was that I was about to join a very long greenway called the Senda del Oso, which is basically, I think, translates as the Greenway of the Bears. So this runs along an old rail track, as many greenways do. It does have the one problem that it's in a relatively bad state of repair. The surface is very rough, and in fact, a cyclist died a couple of years ago leaning on one of the wooden railings over the gorge, which broke and gave way. But this year they are putting a lot more money into restoring it, apparently.
Hola. Gracias.
Nada, paz.
Oh, this is beautiful. Oh my God. Oh.
We have sound here because I accidentally recorded this section in video mode rather than the usual time-lapse mode I use. I've speeded up these segments because otherwise we'd be cycling along here for hours, but what I've done is I've left in the audio and brought it back to normal speed at bits where anything of interest is actually happening. Most of the interactions with people I'm cycling past, some of those turned out to be quite entertaining. The gorge, as you can see, is very impressive. I've left in my exclamations as well. And this was entirely unexpected. I didn't know there was a greenway here at all. It was purely that my Cycle Travel, the website and app I use for planning routes, had routed me along this. It always tries to find the quietest way and uses greenways if they're available. So that was a great surprise, as you might imagine, as I was coming down here. As I said, the one problem, and if you look you can see, is the surface is very rough in parts, so it was quite slow, and I knew it was relatively long.
Holy shit, this is amazing.
Also, keep in mind that I am cycling this on the 1st of June, and it's already starting to get quite busy, including some large groups of cyclists. I think it might be pretty tough if you are trying to do this more towards peak season.
Hola.
The enthusiastic cheer there is quite entertaining. So why was that happening? Well, I think basically it's because I'm obviously on a touring bike. I've got two big panniers hanging off the back of it, so I'm carrying a lot of luggage. So that probably is people going, oh, that's weird. And then they're going, wait a second, where's this guy coming from? He's probably coming from an overnight stop somewhere. And they're realising that in all likelihood I'm coming down from that pass, which, as I said, is a pass that is one that is used in, like, you know, the long distance road races, Tour of Spain type thing. So it's probably the sort of thing that's a bit of a legend among cyclists. So you see somebody on a touring bike and you go, what on earth are they doing? And that, I'm sure, with along with my not super Spanish pronunciation, even if I'm just doing an hola, did result in quite a few people being visibly entertained by me. I had noticed as well, actually, earlier as I was coming down from the pass, there were road cyclists passing me on the other side on the way up, the Lycra and all the rest, and quite a few of them were kind of staring at me as I was going past them as well, and I presume for exactly the same reason. They were just going, what on earth is this guy doing? So there's also wildlife on the trail, and here we have some.
Hola. Insects?
No, a snake,
like
a little snake.
a little snake.
Yes, in the middle, and for this reason we have stopped. Yes.
Has it gone into the grass?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Of course, the combination of my raincoat and my fisherman's baseball cap underneath the helmet with its long orange neck scarf probably does mean I also look quite unusual. So as far as I could make out, this is probably a popular day trip out from Oviedo and surrounding areas for cyclists. So you'd probably, you drive up here, rent a bike, and then you cycle part of the trail and back. And so you don't really expect people to be 17 days into a long distance tour around the entire region of northern Spain to be accompanying you on the track. There's walkers as well. You'll have seen me doing the hola there, which was my technique I used during the Camino to warn people I was coming. My bell had broken just before I came over for this trip, but in fact I find ringing the bell is a bit awkward on these sort of trails because people often feel you're being cranky with them, or it's a bit too much like beeping a horn. So the hola probably works better. If you've been following the 17 days so far, and I've still another 5 to go. You'll be aware that I hadn't done a huge amount of planning for this trip. I had relied on Cycle Travel to plot the route for me. I just basically put in where I wanted to be each night, and it's mostly worked out very well. And I would say, in terms of people thinking about doing cycle touring, what I see a lot in terms of online discussions in Facebook pages and things is, I think, people putting themselves off by packing their fears is one expression people use it, but thinking of everything that could go wrong, for instance, and thinking you have to be prepared for all those possibilities. And also then, in terms of routes, just trying to plan at a level of detail that means you'd be planning for days for every single day you were cycling. And I think my, not haphazard, but more willingness to accept things may go wrong a bit is one of the things that enables me to get on the road a lot more. And from following people who are cycling almost full time, I think that's even more so with them. Like you get a very strong sense that the thing that enables you to stay on the road is being willing to accept minor setbacks. Nothing too serious, you'd hope. It does mean, though, that, as I'll have said a few times on the previous days, I often get home and then I discover that there was something about the place I was cycling by, or very near the place that I was cycling by, that I'd really like to have seen. And somewhere along here is one of those examples, because the trail is called the Trail of the Bear or whatever because there's bears in this valley, but there's two particularly famous bears that were orphaned after the mother was shot, and they were brought up by people. However, they became too domesticated to release back into the wild, so they, in fact, live by the side of the trail in an enclosure. I think it's 12 acres, so it's a pretty big enclosure. But as far as I know, the trail actually goes right past it. And when I was looking at the video playing back, there is a section where there's an obvious kind of high wire fence sloped inwards. May even be coming up, in fact, in this section here. And there are, those like labelling plaques or information boards, just here on the right, just outside of it. So I possibly could have seen the bears. No, the time in the mountains, I didn't actually see any. I saw the signs. I did see in Pola de Somiedo, after I'd eaten and I was walking around the evening, there were a group of people pointing up the mountains at something, and I thought maybe they'd seen a goat, but it was only later on I was thinking, oh, maybe that was a bear they were saying. No, I got my phone out and went into maximum zoom, which gives you a kind of pseudo binocular type effect, and went looking, but I couldn't spot anything there myself. Yeah, so don't overplan, because if you do overplan, you'll miss stuff. But the one disadvantage you are going to have to accept is that also means you'll miss stuff because you just don't realise it's there as you're cycling straight past it. The journey being more important than the destination, I guess, applying in this particular case. Part of my purpose in creating this channel, apart from having a place to upload my videos to, which is important to me, I want to be able to keep those for years to come, was to encourage other people to take up e-bike touring. I think it's a very sustainable form of tourism. You can take to the roads for weeks and you're probably not really using that much more in terms of resources than you would be if you were staying at home, and that's fairly unusual in terms of travel. We've become very dependent, I think, on travel that requires a lot of energy, in particular jet flying around the place. So yeah, I'm hoping in watching this you're kind of going, oh, I think I could do this. Doesn't look that difficult. I might take off for Spain myself next year. And then, as I use my catchphrase, I might meet you on the road. The one thing I would encourage you to do if you're enjoying this is to give the video a like. It will help me get it out to more people. Obviously subscribe if you haven't done so already. But also, if you're on Instagram, give me a follow there. It's eBike Touring Life as well. And the reason to also follow me on Instagram is that this YouTube video, I'm editing it together in mid-December. You can probably hear my voice is a bit gravelly in comparison to other ones because I've got a cold, have had the last few days, and that's, as I said, it's recorded on the 1st of June, so it takes me a long time basically to edit each of these videos together. You don't get to see them anything like live. So what I do is, as I'm actually traveling, I post live photographs short video clips to Instagram, and then at the end of every day I do a little write-up about that day and stick in my 10 best photos. So it'll give you a much more immediate sense of what I'm doing right now at that particular moment. As I got towards the end of the Greenway section, I was wondering what came next, in that I'd been looking at my cycle map, and it was pretty clear before I could get into Oviedo I'd have to go over what looked like an incredibly steep set of ridges, but it wasn't showing much of an elevation, so I was going, oh, that generally means there's going to be tunnels. And if you've been watching the previous days, you know on a couple of occasions I've had quite long road tunnels, which are never great to cycle through because they tend to be very narrow and you're always worried about other traffic in them not seeing you. But as it turned out, that was grand. So what happens at the end of the rail trail is it goes into these sort of quiet village back roads, and then you reach the town of Trobejo, I think it's called, which is the site of a major arms manufacturing plant, in fact. So if you read the social history of the route I've just cycled down, a lot of it talks about rural migration because all the young people left the villages in the mountains to get work in the arms plant down in this town that we're now going to come into. But then on the other side of the town, as you'll see, we go back onto fairly narrow roads again, heading up towards the kind of steep mountains I could see ahead. And then it turns out what there is there's another old rail line that is cutting through those mountains, including a couple of tunnels, and that takes you right into Oviedo itself. So it gives me a moment then perhaps to finish up with and talking a little bit about Oviedo, because it's got a very interesting history. So Oviedo's history essentially starts in the 700s, and that's the period where basically Spain is being, the area Spain also is being fought over between two rival migrants groups, one of which are the Caliphate, the Islamic rulers coming as part of the huge Arab expansion, and the others are the Visigoths, who of course were originally coming from, I think, somewhere around Germany, and had done a deal with Rome where they were given Spain. So the Visigoths held Asturias, and the Muslims had captured most of the rest of Spain below that, and the Visigoths in about 760 established the kingdom of Oviedo. It's normally described to being established by two sets of monks, and then so the next couple of hundred years is the battles back and forth between those two forces, where the Visigoths eventually managed to expand south, and they moved their capital to Leon around the new millennium. And then afterwards, there's an interesting period in Oviedo in the 12th century where there's a bishop, Pola de Oviedo, who is known as the Fabulist. And basically, that's because he forged, or rather in the recreation of various legal documents to property, he changed the wording so that the church in Oviedo gained a whole load of possessions that they perhaps would not have otherwise. So that's quite a good sort of setup for the ancient history of the city. But jumping to the modern era, it's also the site or the centre of the 1934 insurrection in Asturias, and let's talk about that for a moment. So Spain, even by European standards, had a fairly brutal stratified class society as it went in from the 19th into the 20th century. You still had a strong feudal remnants in terms of church holdings of land. You had campaigns of assassinations against union organisers. You had a whole load of things along those lines that meant Spanish society was very polarised between a working class which was often engaged in factories and mining work, and a bourgeoisie ruling class that was often very, very hostile to those workers. That's a really long history to get into in detail, so I'm not going to talk about that here. But in Oviedo, things come to a head in October of 1934, when during what was intended to be a national insurrection, but it mostly just happened in Asturias, there was a revolt against the Conservative government involving about 50,000 workers, mostly miners, who armed themselves with dynamite and captured Oviedo after heavy fighting. They captured an arsenal with 30,000 rifles and machine guns, and the army responded by sending in General Franco, whose name is infamous, who brought in soldiers from the colonial army in Africa to put down the insurrection. And the reason for doing that was they were worried, and probably with justification, that if they used conscripted Spanish troops to try and put it down, they might very well sympathise with the rebels and go over to them. The aftermath of the Rising saw a brutal set of reprisals, executions against ringleaders, and in many ways set the scene for the Spanish Revolution, stroke Spanish Civil War, that was to follow just 2 years later. And in turn, of course, that set the scene for the European-wide war against fascism in 1939. It's sometimes said that those who fought in Spain against fascism were premature anti-fascists, because people travelled internationally, in particular were doing it illegally, where 3 years later everybody in Europe was more or less involved in that fight. But to a certain extent, Oviedo is the same story within Spain itself. I stayed in the Hotel Asturias in Oviedo and locked my bike to that railings outside. This was a supermarket meal evening, but I did spend the evening wandering around the old city and getting in the sights. So this gets us to the end of day 17 of my trip around the Spanish north. I am now 5 days out from Bilbao and the ferry home. Stay tuned for those stories, and hopefully someday I get to meet you on the road.